This was a time when the gods and asuras were at war with each other. Asuras are demigods. Some are said to be good, some are said to be bad. And sometimes they are referred to as demons. But here they are a race, and Rishaparva was the king of that group of asuras. They were at war with the gods, and even though the gods were good fighters and better fighters, the asuras were gaining the upper hand. Why? Because Rishaparva, the Asura king, had an ace up his sleeve. This was a powerful Brahmana by the name Ushanas or Shukra. Shukracharya was a very powerful man. He had the knowledge of Sanjivani, which is a knowledge that would bring back people from the dead. Imagine the military might of an army which had access to that kind of power. The gods killed the asuras in large numbers, but Shukra kept reviving them, bringing them back from the dead, making it difficult for the gods to win. Unfortunately for the gods, they didn't have anyone on their side with Shukra's skills. And yes, in this story, the gods are mortals. They die, and that's how it's in the book. So, it's not an exaggeration to say that Shukra was invaluable to Rishaparva. The gods lament the fact that they didn't have anyone on their side who had the knowledge of Sanjivani. This made them strategically weaker compared to the Asura. They decide that for them to effectively win this war against the Asura, they too need the knowledge of Sanjivani. But how can they access it? Shukra was the only person who had the precious knowledge of Sanjivani. The gods come up with a plan. They decide that they would send someone to learn the knowledge from Shukra. But we all know that Shukra was not going to give out this knowledge to just anyone, right? The gods decide that they will send someone with the kind of background that Shukra cannot ignore. Someone who was not just smart but also pleasant and charming. Someone who would impress Shukra. The gods also decide that it would be a great idea to send someone young and handsome. You see, Shukra had someone whom he considered invaluable, and that was none other than his beautiful and intelligent daughter, Devayani. Devayani was the apple of his eye, and it was a fact widely known that she had considerable influence and sway over Shukra. So the gods decide that it is a great idea to send someone who was closer to Devayani's age so that he could charm not only Shukra but also Devayani. With that in mind, they decide on a young and handsome man named Kacha. Kacha was someone Shukra could not ignore. He was the oldest son of a Brahmana named Brihaspati. Just as Shukra was the preceptor to the Asura, Brihaspati was the preceptor to the gods. But it's not like Shukra could turn down the son of his counterpart, now could he? The gods' plans for Kacha was simple. They want Kacha to seek an apprenticeship under Shukra. And while there, they want him to charm Shukra and his daughter, worm his way into their hearts, and convince Shukra that he was worthy of receiving the precious knowledge of Sanjivani.
That's a brilliant plan.
The gods think so too. So they are convinced that is their path to victory, and they convince Kacha of the same. And when they offer him a share in the sacrificial offerings that they generally receive, Kacha accepts. Just as the gods predicted, Shukra accepts Kacha as his student. Here are some of the specifics of the agreement. Kacha pledges to practice brahmacharya under Shukra for a period of 1,000 years.
1,000 years? Really?
I think here they're using 1000 years to exaggerate, to tell us that he's practicing it for a really long time. I think here they're taking poetic license, if that makes sense. And brahmacharya can mean many things. Here it means that Kacha would study under Shukra for a period of 1000 years, and in that time he would work on his inner self. He would lead a lifestyle that would be pure or extremely simple, like that of a monk. And during this time, he would also live with Shukra, which means that he would be in close proximity to both Shukra and his daughter Devayani.
That's convenient.
Isn't it though? Soon preparations are made for Kacha to take up brahmacharya, and he moves into Shukra's household. Kacha quickly adjusts to his routine in the new household. Along with his studies, he is required to do certain chores around the house, and he completes them with his usual good humor. Everyone likes Kacha. He was a smart, charming, even-tempered, handsome young man. Very quickly, he becomes dear to Shukra, and he becomes very good friends with Devayani. Devayani cannot help but like him. They are of the same age. They are both young. He was a lot of fun to be with. He treated her with respect. He made sweet gestures of gifts of flowers and fruits. They played musical instruments and sang and danced together in their free time.
Sounds like every girl's dream.
He does. And even though they were having all this fun, never did Kacha ever forget his vow or lose focus. He was truly a person worthy of Devayani's admiration. And just like that, 500 years of the 1000-year vow had passed. And just like that, Devayani falls in love with Kacha. To be on the receiving end of Devayani's love was truly a blessing. She saves Kacha's life not once but 2 times. The first time was when the Danavas attacked Kacha when he was in the forest. The Danavas are also demigods, and some of them were aligned with the demons in the war against gods. The Danavas come to know of the fact that Kacha was under Shukra's tutelage, and he intended to learn the art of Sanjivani. The Danavas worried that if that happened, then the gods would have access to the knowledge and they would lose the war. They wanted to make sure to take care of Kacha. They lay in wait for a time when they could attack Kacha, and that time comes when one day they find Kacha all alone in the forest where he had taken the cows to graze. The Danavas attack Kacha, they kill him, and to make sure that Shukra would not be able to resurrect Kacha, they cut Kacha's body into teeny tiny sesame seed sized pieces and feed them to the jackals and wolves. That evening, Devayani is waiting for Kacha to return. She searches for him everywhere, but no signs of him. The cows return without him, the sacrificial fires were not lit. It was one of Kacha's many tasks, and he always completed them diligently. Devayani is concerned. He must have been killed. There is no other explanation, she thinks. She goes to Shukra and shares her concerns. She pleads with him to bring Kacha back. I cannot live without him, she tells. Shukracharya uses his powers to bring Kacha back from the dead. When they ask Kacha what happened, Kacha tells them of the Danavas' attack. Everyone in Shukra's household is shocked. But everything was okay now and they're relieved. Eventually, life goes back to normal. But what they didn't know is that the Danavas had not given up. The Danavas lay in wait for another opportunity to attack Kacha. And this time, that opportunity comes when they find Kacha alone in the forest collecting flowers. So they attack Kacha, kill him, burn his body, grind his ashes into powder, and then mix that powder into a container of wine. And then they do something unimaginably cruel. They deliver this wine to Shukra. Tragically, that evening, an unsuspecting Shukra consumes the wine. Meanwhile, Devayani is getting increasingly worried because earlier that day she had sent Kacha to collect flowers from the forest. It was almost night time and he was not back yet. This can't be good, she decides. She shares her concerns with Shukra, and Shukra figures out that Kacha had been killed yet again. Shukra is resigned to the fact that Kacha is dead. He had already revived him once and he didn't see why he had to do that again. He thinks that what happened, and so they have to accept Kacha's death and move on. But Devayani is adamant and she tells her father that they should do something and bring Kacha back from the dead. Shukra tries to make her see reason. You know better than to grieve the death of a mere mortal. Death is something everyone, even the gods, have to deal with, he says. Nothing, Shukra says, can pacify Devayani. She begs her father to do something, anything, to save Kacha's life. I love him, she confesses to her father. I will follow wherever he goes, she declares, her voice laced with grief. Already grieving the death of his beloved student, Shukra is even more distressed when he sees the degree to which Kacha's death was affecting his daughter. Wishing to ease her pain, Shukra decides to bring Kacha back from the dead one more time. Where are you, Kacha? He asks. He is surprised when a voice sounding similar to Kacha says, I'm here. To his greater and utter shock, the voice came from inside of his stomach. Shukracharya is in disbelief when he realizes that his dear disciple was in his stomach. How did you come to be in my stomach? Please explain so that I can understand, he says. Kacha explains that he remembered everything that happened before and after his death because Shukra was the one who called out to him. Kacha tells them about how the Danavas attacked him, killed him, burned his body, mixed his ashes with the wine and gave the wine to Shukra to drink. And that is how he ended up in Shukra's stomach. Shukra is beyond shocked. Shukra and Devayani decide that they have to bring Kacha back from the dead. Easier said than done, because Kacha was now in Shukra's stomach, and to bring Kacha out of there, they would have to cut open Shukra, which meant Shukra would have to die. No, says Devayani, this will not do. This will not work. We have to think of something else, she says. After some thought, Shukracharya comes to a decision. He tells Kacha, you are a very lucky man indeed. My daughter loves you very much, so I cannot let you die. So here's what we will do. I will teach you the art of Sanjivani. You will come out of my stomach, and then you will use the knowledge that I passed on to you and bring me back from the dead. Kacha agrees, and this is how, whilst still inside his preceptor's stomach, Kacha learns the art of Sanjivani, a result the gods had hoped for. After the knowledge transfer was complete, Kacha comes out of Shukra's stomach. Then he uses the knowledge he had just learned to revive Shukra. And that is why The Brahmana class traditionally does not partake in wine.
Really?
It was something Shukracharya decreed. So Shukracharya is angry and upset with himself for making the decision to consume the contaminated wine, which resulted in him inadvertently consuming his dear student and the man his daughter loved. So he realized that wine impaired his judgment, as a result of which something catastrophic would have happened. With this in mind, he stated that no Brahmana would ever partake in wine from that day forward, and that would be the dharma that all Brahmanas would follow. As for Kacha, life goes back to normal. He continued to live with Shukracharya and continued his studies. Once he completed the promised 1000 years of Brahmacharya, Kacha asks for Shukracharya's permission to leave so that he can take up the job the gods had offered him and work there. Shukracharya gives him his permission, and Kacha gets ready to go to Indra's abode. When Kacha goes to Devayani to say his goodbye, Devayani asks him to take her with him. She confesses her love to him and asks him to marry her. To her surprise, Kacha turns her down. When she confronts him with her feelings, Kacha tells her that he thinks of her as a sister, especially because he came out of Shukra's stomach, and so he thinks of Shukracharya as his father. He says that anything romantic between them would be inappropriate.
That makes sense. Shukracharya did sort of rebirth him, did he?
I guess it does. But what's clear is Kacha wasn't interested in her in that way, and Devayani never thought that her love would not be reciprocated. She had always imagined that she and Kacha would eventually marry. Broken-hearted and angry, Devayani lashes out at Kacha. She scolds him, she curses him, she uses really harsh words. Kacha was upset with her. He was not going to take kindly at being cursed at. So he tells Devayani that none of her words or curses would come true because he came from a place of dharma and she did not. And he also curses her. He tells her that no rishi would ever marry her. And that is how the former good friends part with bitter and angry words.